these talks here, about consciousness are not talks that, well, it can be understood by the mind, but they're talks beyond the mind. It talks to the being that is beyond the mind. And so it's a direct connection to the being, to your being, to your self, your real self. Because it is the self, the being, the unbounded reality of that self-sense that really speaks and listens to itself through us, through all of us here. We are the conduits of consciousness. So consciousness itself is always in the experience of itself, everywhere, at every point within itself. But what has happened is we've become identified with the instrument, the body-mind, that has been created in the process of consciousness experiencing itself. And so the true experience of consciousness experiencing itself, really beyond the appearance of the mind-body and all of its perceptions of the world out here, has been lost. It's really been lost due to that false identification. And so we don't pay much attention to the body, to the perceptions, to the thoughts, to the emotions, the feelings, the sensations. We just be simple and innocent. And this is something that, well, the mind really can't do. It doesn't know how to be simple. But something does. Something that witnesses the mind. Something that is just clear and pure and awake and alert all by itself, that gives the mind its power to think. It's the field by virtue of which the mind can think. And so it's this pure field of being. It's not something the mind can know. Of course the mind knows it, but it doesn't really know it. It's something that only the being can know. Only the being can know itself. So we want to get more intimate with ourselves, more in touch with the real, pure being that is who you are, and that all of this, all of these perceptions ride upon that pure field of being. And that field of being is silent. It's so silent. It's so silent that it creates the stillness in the space around. So the stillness silence, the presence that's arising now all around you is due to the silence of yourself, silence of pure being, pure wakeful awareness itself. Awareness itself, on its own level, is not colored or clouded by the objects within it. All of these objects all around us here are beautiful, beautiful. And the pure being that is the basis of that is not only underlying everything, everywhere, it's permeating and pervading everything. And so that light of consciousness, pure consciousness itself, can be beheld by itself, everywhere, within itself, whether eyes opened or closed, whether going within or going without, doesn't matter. Not really any difference from the perspective of consciousness. So the field of consciousness itself just builds on itself when we're simple and innocent and not engaging too much in the mind, in the thinking, in the analysis, in the judgments, in the opinions, in the concepts and beliefs. When we get out of that, just drop back from all of that activity of the mind, and we drop back from that activity of the sensory perception of the forms and phenomena that are in front of us here now. Then we create an opportunity for the self, the being itself, for awareness itself, to experience itself all by itself on its own level, free from the thoughts, free from the mind, free from the intellect, free from those emotions, free from the perceptions. And so some brightness and lightness of awareness itself, just pure awareness itself, gets maybe just a glimpse of itself. Just a glimpse, because even just a glimpse of itself is so beautiful, so refreshing. So it's a relief. It's just really a relief to drop back out of the crazy mind and let go, let it do whatever it wants. Let it think whatever it wants, or not think. Let the feelings feel or not feel. Let the perceptions perceive. Well, the perceptions are, and emotions and thoughts are happening, and we just allow it all to happen. Allow it to happen. And what we do is just relax back into something beyond that, something that is free from that, not too caught up in all of that activity. So that the presence, the silence itself can create more stillness and just more presence. Enough of that presence and stillness that can get created. Well, it's been here all along, hasn't it? It's been here all along. It's just that the mind and the emotions and perceptions have been in the way of its own experience of itself. But it's been here all along, and on its own level, it is so pure and clean and light and free and joyous. And it's just joy itself. It's a joy that hasn't quite been unleashed yet. No, but it's a joy of freedom, at least, from that mind to whatever degree we experience now. But there's a point that comes when you shift to being that unbounded, pure awareness itself. And that unbounded, pure awareness is what you are. It is what the self is, what the I has been all along, on its own level, free from all of this, all of everything. And so we just allow the awareness itself that is behind the seeing of the eyes. Allow that awareness itself that enables the eyes to see and apprehend their objects right in front of you now. Allow that awareness itself to see itself, to see the clarity and purity of itself right in front of us. Here now, it doesn't matter. We don't care about anything else. It's not about the objects in awareness. It's not really, at this point, about the process of seeing the objects. At this point, what it's about is the field, the unbounded reality of the seer, in which all of the seeing and all of the objects are found. So there's a deeper seeing, a deeper looking that takes place in the seeing, that goes beyond the objects, through the objects. And it hits a point of itself within itself. When it hits that point, when it sees that point of itself, all by itself, if it sees a point of itself all by itself, it sees itself at every point, underlying initially everything everywhere. So a beautiful expanded consciousness comes that is really beyond the mind and body. It's really beyond the whole room, the whole space. In fact, the whole room, the whole environment, the whole world, the whole universe, the entire body-mind is within that unboundedness of consciousness. It's a vastness that is there at the very rim of the mind, at the farthest edge of the field of perception. There I am. There I am. And everywhere, underlying and pervading everything, everywhere. So the presence itself gets an opportunity to become more present, more dominant. And the awareness itself, which everywhere, at every point, has always been in the motion of knowing itself, in the process of experiencing itself, drawing itself more deep within itself, deeper and deeper within itself, so that the consciousness itself becomes more concentrated, more focused upon itself, so that the intensity of the presence in the field of space around us becomes more and more dominant and completely begins to draw itself into itself, everywhere, all around. So the wholeness of our being that is everywhere, all around, in which the body-mind, all of its perceptions are there. This wholeness of the light of consciousness itself continues to become more and more bright, more awake, more alert, more focused upon itself everywhere within itself. And the brightness of itself, the purity of itself, the cleanness of itself becomes more easy to be known by itself. And so it's such a clearness, such a purity, such a bright light that begins to polish itself. It really is polishing itself constantly. It's shining upon itself, brightening its own experience of itself. This is consciousness all by itself. We're not talking about the phenomena and the objects in the consciousness at this point. Let's just talk about the awareness itself, in which all of this is contained, including the mind and body. So the awareness itself, it just becomes more awake to itself all by itself when we allow it. to do so. And this means just forgetting about the knowing and the understanding. Forget about the activity of the mind and emotions and the perceptions. Just forget about that for now, because consciousness itself, if we move out of the way, let go, consciousness itself is riveted upon itself everywhere within itself, and it pulls itself more deeply into itself. Like it's concentrated, focused upon itself like a laser beam everywhere within itself. And it draws itself more deeply into itself like a tractor beam of wakefulness, pure wakefulness that keeps pulling itself more deeply into itself, and in that drawing itself more deeply within itself, it creates these streams of the flow of itself, knowing itself. These flows of consciousness in its process of experiencing itself. It's just consciousness being conscious of itself, that's all. No big thing. You don't have to get into any kind of weird perception or anything. This is beyond the mechanism of perception. This is within the consciousness itself, where it's only all by itself. It doesn't really have a mechanism of perception. It's just infusing itself more deeply into itself. It's really just loving itself. It's folding itself back upon itself and caressing itself. And in that constant caress of itself, it creates and molds and gives birth to the appearance of all these objects and phenomena of experience, which in reality are just the unbounded expressed appearance of the universal reality of your own body-mind. Because the body-mind and consciousness itself are one thing. That's why we got so fooled. That's why we got fooled here. We got stuck in the appearance of the individual body-mind. And we thought that's who we were. But we didn't know that the body-mind itself was not individual. That's because we didn't know that who we were. We didn't know that consciousness itself was infinite, unbounded. So you see why that unbounded reality of the pure reality of consciousness itself has to be seen first, so it can know its unboundedness, it can know its infinity, it can know its freedom, it can be freedom, it can be peace, it can be joy, it can be being, so that when it becomes familiar with itself, moving back upon itself, deeply engaged in its own experience of itself, that it becomes awake to this aliveness of itself, so that the presence in the field around us here, rather than being just this silent presence and stillness, that it begins to be more alive, more awake, more vibrant, more full of life, the whole life around us here, in which all of these objects are contained, becomes more vibrant and alive. All of those atoms, subatomic particles, moving about there. Really, they're just the flow of consciousness, knowing itself at every point within itself, creating the appearance of all of these photons, electrons that come together to create the appearance of all of these forms and phenomena all around us here. But it's really consciousness itself being so alive within itself, alive with joy. It's a full of joy. You know, it's such a lively thing. It's not a flat field of consciousness. And initially it can be flat, a little flat. But in any case, at any point, at no point, is consciousness itself flat in comparison to the experience of just individual life. Unbounded consciousness itself, in its flatness, is a big difference from the little life experience. It's a big change from the little life experience of the mind and body. So we could only hope, to be that flatness of unbounded unbounded cosmic consciousness. Because that's the first step. That's really the first step. So that the consciousness itself becomes more awake to its process of being consciousness, to its process of being awake within itself. So there's really a vibrant flow of consciousness. And because consciousness itself is a complete wholeness of everythingness in reality. And so that knowing of consciousness of itself has been mirrored in the process of perceiving and experiencing. In this right here now, in this process of perceiving and experiencing that is happening here now, through the mind, through the feelings, through the senses, that whole process, it's a flow. It's a flow of consciousness, knowing itself. It is the detailed, you could see the detailed description of the fineness of consciousness, knowing itself at every point within itself. And this is what it looks like on the surface of life. This whole universe is what it looks like. What the flow of consciousness knowing itself, ever in the process of experiencing itself, creates the eternal continuum of the appearance of the universe and of all life everywhere. And so this is our flow. This is yourself. This is your being that we're speaking about. This is being. This is the universal reality of the same sense of self that you are experiencing right now, only free from its shackles of individual mind, body, and objective physical world appearance. And so that's what it's like. That's really what it's like. It's just flowing within itself, experiencing itself, knowing itself, falling back upon itself, splashing in the ocean of its own knowing of itself, frolicking in the appearance of creation. This is what life is about. This is what life is about. This is what your life is about. This is the true reality of the unbounded reality of your life. So what if we got caught in the individual experience of life for a while? That's fine too. That's okay too. We don't have to negate that. No. It's all a part of it. It's just that it's never been individual in the first place. That whole individual life, individual body, mind, the individual apparent objects of the physical world here, they've all been made out of infinity. They're made out of pure infinity. And and that's what you are. That's what the I sense is. That's what the self is. So you see, as that consciousness knows itself on that unbounded, infinite level of itself, initially, you see, but then it gets infused more and more and more into the nature of the mind and body and the perceptions, such that it remembers itself as being everything, everywhere, in an upsurge of joy and bliss. That's what it is. It's just joy and bliss. And this is what it finds out, that it is the true nature of the fabric of infinity itself. Even the fabric of infinity itself is composed out of bliss, just pure bliss itself. And see, this is the thing, is when consciousness itself drills down into itself deeply at every point within itself, right here, now in front of us, and all around. What takes place is it becomes a little bit more awake to this reverberant flow of joy and bliss that it really is, because it's a vibrant aliveness of consciousness that appears as a world, that shines as a world, like that projector, rolling around, reels rolling around, and it creates the appearance of all of these objects and forms and phenomena here in front of us that we enjoy. We just enjoy it all. And we don't get caught up in all of the drama that appears, That's just a part of the process, of the mechanics of the process of consciousness experiencing itself and refining its own experience of itself, so that more of the divine reality of itself can come to the forefront of experience. So it's all in the process of consciousness, coming back to the finer experience of the pure divinity within the infinity of the flow of consciousness knowing itself. So you see, this is what's transpiring here right now. This is what's going on. And so when that is going on, it's sure we know what's going on in the world, and then we know all of that, what's going on in the world. But look at the product that is being built in the field, the whole field of the collective consciousness, which is just images of the whole flow of consciousness, conscious of itself. And so look what is coming up in the collective consciousness. A very beautiful, fine flow of divine life really coming up more and more. And it's kind of pushing out all of these other things, and all of these stresses, all of these old stuff, old ignorance that has been there. They don't like it. They don't like it. But there's not too much they can say about it, because, see, once we know what is really transpiring in the world, in the life, in the universe, which is the reality that there is an unfoldment of the consciousness itself to more and more of the refined reality of itself, to more of the divine aspect of itself, so that as that light of consciousness increases, the darkness just begins to recede, and at least the darkness is able to be seen. And so this is what's taking place. The darkness that was there all along is starting to be seen, and so it's on its way out. It's on its way out. So this is all we have to concern ourselves with about what's transpiring in the world today. Because what is more important is to be at the basis of it all, to allow our attention to be with the reality of the unbounded field of consciousness, deeply experiencing itself everywhere within itself, so that we are continually awake to the brightening of the light of consciousness, shining more and more brightly, opening up more and more of its light to reveal more of the divine reality of everything everywhere. that everything everywhere is it's always been divine all along. It's just that we were so foggy and so dense, so much clouded by ignorance, that we just couldn't see it. That's all. But it's been there all along. It has been here all along, right in front of us. So this is the thing to concern ourselves with. If you have to have any great grave concern about what's transpiring, have the grave concern about the lightness and joy and divine spark that is coming awake everywhere, that is just beginning to glisten at every point within the field of awareness itself that is right here in front of you now. So, because it's just a field of joy and lightness and bliss and freedom and peace and all of that stuff that we want to have. We don't want the negative stuff. And so when we put our attention on that negative stuff, well, that's what we'll get. Because we're such powerful beings, And so let's not go there. Just not go there. Just be with what is, because it's more in the direction of truth and reality. It's just what you are. Because the consciousness itself that comes up in the flow of bliss, in the flow of joy, what comes up and causes that bubbling joy of bliss is this beautiful, beautiful, supreme, divine power, pure power of pure divinity itself, that is really ever in its, you could say, in its process of embracing itself, loving itself, and causing consciousness itself to be conscious of itself, and creating the cosmic intelligence that gives rise to the appearance of the forms and phenomena of the universe. But it's all one thing. It's all one grand wholeness ever deeply knowing itself, deeply unfolding more of itself, so that more of that divine purity, divine clarity, really exquisite divinity can be beheld by consciousness everywhere within itself. The glory of consciousness itself is to behold the divinity, the divine radiance that is the cause itself of consciousness itself. And so it's this kind of life that we want to live. It's this kind of perception that we want to have, and become more familiar with this reality of ourself, rather than just the surface appearance that seems to be there. But we allow it. But we know something different. We know something deeper is transpiring. And it's transpiring in the core of your own soul. It's transpiring deep within the infinity of being itself, cosmic consciousness itself. So this is what you are. This is, we've been speaking about you. This is all about you and what you really are. What all of this really is. So we just let go. Don't jump up and away from this now. Just sit, close the eyes, let go. Let go.